A quiet divorce felt too gentle for what he'd done. A private confrontation felt like letting him keep the lie, safe, polished, and untouched, the same way it had thrived for months in front of people who clapped for our marriage like it was a performance. So I chose the only stage where he'd ever felt truly untouchable, the garden party. It was the kind of evening our neighborhood loved to pretend was effortless. Jazz music nobody really listened to, soft lights strung through trees, clusters of people laughing a little too loudly at jokes that weren't that funny. My husband had been drinking steadily since we arrived. His cheeks were flushed, his voice sharper with every glass, his confidence swelling the way it always did when he had an audience. I watched him from across the yard, near the fire pit, surrounded by his friends, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger. No heartbreak. Just a cold, crystalline clarity. Around 8:30, someone suggested dancing. A few couples drifted toward the patio, swaying awkwardly like they were trying to remember who they used to be before life got heavy. I walked straight to him and held out my hand. "Dance with me," I said. He stared at me. "What?" "Since tonight," I replied. "One dance." He sighed dramatically, set his wine down, and took my hand with the enthusiasm of someone agreeing to a root canal. We moved to the center of the patio. I placed my hand on his waist. He was stiff, distant, already looking past me toward the group near the bar, as if I was something he had to tolerate until the real fun resumed. The song slowed. I leaned in, not out of affection, but because I needed to witness it. I needed one final confirmation that what I was about to do wasn't cruelty, it was justice. He jerked away so sharply he nearly stumbled, then laughed, short and bitter, and loud enough for nearby guests to hear clearly, he announced, "I'd rather kiss a complete stranger than kiss you." The conversations around us stuttered into silence. A nervous laugh sputtered somewhere, then died. My husband's lips curled into a smirk, savoring the attention, savoring my humiliation. I didn't flinch. I just turned my gaze to the woman near the grill, Priscilla Blackwell, watching us with a frozen expression, her drink clutched too tightly in her hand. Then I looked back at my husband and smiled. Small. Cold. "Funny," I said calmly. "Priscilla isn't exactly a stranger, is she?" I used to think the worst kind of betrayal was the kind you could name quickly. Cheating. Lying. A text message you stumble upon at midnight that turns your blood to ice. But I learned something uglier. The worst betrayal is the kind that happens slowly. So quietly, you start adjusting yourself around it, the way you adjust your posture when a chair is uncomfortable, until you forget what comfort ever felt like. My name is Dawn Whitmore. I was 57 when I realized I'd been married to a man who only loved the version of me that stayed silent. On paper, my life looked stable, respectable, clean edges. I lived with my husband, Victor Whitmore, in Roswell, Georgia, in a house that had been renovated twice and still somehow never felt warm. Victor liked things pristine, countertops empty, towels folded with hotel precision, emotions filed away like receipts. I wasn't a dramatic woman. I didn't throw plates. I didn't scream in doorways. I built my life the way I built everything, steadily, methodically, with a long view. I worked in the operational side of our business. Victor liked calling it his company, but we both knew the truth. He was the face, I was the spine. I handled contracts, vendor relationships, schedules, payroll approvals. I knew which accounts were fragile, which clients needed hand-holding, and which numbers couldn't be allowed to dip if we wanted the bank to keep smiling. Victor had charm, the kind that filled rooms. When we first met, that charm felt like sunlight. It was at a professional event, one of those mixers where everyone wears a name tag and pretends small talk is organic. I'd been standing near a table of appetizers I didn't want, listening to a man explain something he'd clearly just learned himself, when Victor stepped beside me and said quietly, "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." I blinked, surprised, then laughed. "And you don't?" I asked. He smiled, easy, confident. "I'm good at pretending." That line should have warned me. Instead, it made me feel seen. Victor pursued me with patience at first. Dinners that felt thoughtful, calls that lasted longer than they needed to, little gestures that made me believe he was the type of man who noticed details. My coffee order, the way I hated loud restaurants, the book I mentioned once in passing. We married with the kind of optimism that feels almost embarrassing in hindsight. And for a while, it worked. Not perfectly, but real life never is. We had 2 children, Beckett and Harper. Beckett was the steady one, sharp-eyed, serious. He grew up watching the world the way Victor watched it. Like every room had a hierarchy, and you needed to know where you stood. Harper was warmth, bright and sociable, the kind of girl who could talk to anyone in a room and somehow make them feel like they mattered. When she moved to Charlotte for work, Victor claimed he was proud. But pride from Victor always came with distance. Like affection was something he rationed. The cracks in my marriage didn't appear as explosions. They showed up as small absences. Victor starting to work late more often, yet coming home smelling like a hotel lobby, not an office. Victor becoming protective of his phone, tilting the screen away even when he was just checking the time. Victor laughing more at messages he wouldn't share. And then there was his social circle, the kind of people who loved to host parties where nothing real was allowed to happen. Perfect lawns, perfect smiles, perfect marriages everyone performed like theater. I'd smile when I needed to. I'd clink glasses. I'd listen to jokes and nod at conversations I didn't care about. And in the middle of all that performance, Victor started to look alive. Not with me. With them. With the attention. With the safety of being admired. I told myself it was a phase. That every marriage goes through quieter seasons. That I was being paranoid. But the body knows before the mind admits it. I began to notice my own stomach tightening when Victor's name lit up on my phone. Because the sound of him felt less like home and more like uncertainty. And somewhere in the middle of that slow unraveling, Beckett saw something I hadn't, something he wasn't supposed to see, something that would change everything. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in through the cracks Victor thought no one noticed. The first person who truly saw it wasn't me. It was Beckett. He didn't come to me immediately. That was his nature. Observe first, verify later. He'd inherited Victor's analytical mind, but not his appetite for deception. Beckett believed information mattered, timing mattered, and once something was said out loud, it couldn't be unsaid. He noticed the lunches first. Victor had always claimed weekday lunches were for networking, an excuse vague enough to deflect questions. But Beckett worked close enough to the city to recognize patterns and anomalies. One afternoon, 6 months before the garden party, Beckett stepped into my home office without knocking. He stood there longer than necessary, hands in his pockets, weight shifting slightly from one foot to the other. That alone told me something was wrong. "Mom," he said finally, "can I ask you something without it turning into a thing?" I closed my laptop. "When has that ever stopped you?" I asked gently. He exhaled through his nose. "Dad's been having lunch with Priscilla Blackwell. A lot." The name landed heavily. Priscilla Blackwell wasn't just anyone. She was married, well-connected, the kind of woman whose smile never reached her eyes. She and her husband, Paul Blackwell, were fixtures in Victor's social orbit. Charity boards, investment dinners, garden parties where reputation was currency. "How do you know?" I asked. Beckett pulled out his phone. "I didn't mean to see it," he said. "I was meeting a client. Different restaurant, 2 towns over." He turned the screen toward me. The photo wasn't dramatic. That was the worst part. Victor and Priscilla sat across from each other in a quiet corner booth. No plates between them, no menus open. Just 2 hands resting on the table, hers covering his, fingers intertwined like they'd done it 1,000 times before. They weren't eating. They were leaning in, laughing softly, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with hunger. My chest tightened, but my voice stayed steady. "Did they notice you?" I asked. "No," Beckett said. "I left before they could." I nodded slowly. That moment was when the investigation began. Not the confrontation. Not the tears. The documentation. I didn't accuse. I didn't ask questions Victor could lie his way out of. I paid attention. I noticed how Tuesdays and Thursdays, became unavoidable travel days. I noticed hotel charges that appeared on our joint credit card, always mid-range, always the same chain, always paid without comment. I noticed Victor changing passwords I'd known for years. I noticed how Priscilla's name started appearing in places it didn't belong. Calendar entries marked as consulting, transfers disguised as investment staging, meetings that never produced anything tangible. And most telling of all, I noticed Victor stopped touching me entirely. Not angrily, not cruelly, just absent. Like affection was a resource he'd already allocated elsewhere. When I stood beside him at events, he played the role flawlessly. Hand on my back, smile for the cameras, polite laughter at my side. But the moment his eyes drifted toward Priscilla across a room, his body shifted toward her without him even realizing it. People think betrayal announces itself with guilt. It doesn't. It announces itself with carelessness. Victor thought I was too composed to notice, too loyal to question, too invested in the idea of us to disrupt it. And for a while, he was right. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I built a timeline. Every hotel stay, every transfer, every discrepancy. By the time the garden party invitation arrived in the mail, cream cardstock, elegant script, I already knew what I was going to do. I just needed the right moment, the right audience, and one final confirmation that Victor believed I was weak enough to humiliate publicly. He gave me that gift himself. The garden party wasn't where the betrayal began. It was where it stopped being protected. By the time Victor laughed and said he'd rather kiss a complete stranger than me, my body had already gone still. Not frozen, anchored. Every instinct that once begged me to preserve the marriage had burned itself out weeks earlier. What remained was precision. The silence after his words was sharp enough to cut glass. Conversations around us didn't just pause, they collapsed. People pretended to adjust their drinks, their shoes, anything to avoid choosing sides too quickly. Victor enjoyed it. I saw it in the slight lift of his chin, the way his shoulders relaxed as attention gathered. Humiliation had always been one of his weapons, but he'd only ever used it in private. Cutting remarks framed as jokes, dismissals masked as concern. Tonight, he wanted witnesses. I gave them to him. I turned, not abruptly, not theatrically, toward Priscilla Blackwell, standing near the grill with a drink she hadn't touched in several minutes. Her face had already gone pale, like her body understood what her mind was scrambling to deny. Then I looked back at Victor and smiled. Not the smile he expected. Not the brittle one I used at fundraisers or family dinners. This one was calm. Funny, I said evenly, my voice carrying just far enough. Priscilla isn't exactly a stranger, is she? The effect was immediate. Victor's expression faltered, just for a fraction of a second. Long enough. Long enough for everyone watching to feel it. Priscilla's glass tipped slightly, wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim as she took an involuntary step backward. Her husband, Paul, stood frozen beside the grill, confusion giving way to something darker as his gaze snapped between his wife and my husband. I let the moment stretch. Then I continued, conversational, almost polite. 4 months, I said, mostly Tuesdays and Thursdays. Marriott off exit 37. Room 214, if anyone's curious. A few gasps. Someone whispered, "Oh my God," under their breath. Victor's mouth opened, closed. No sound came out. Paid for with our joint credit card, I added. Not particularly discreet, Victor. Priscilla's lips parted, but her voice failed her. Paul's face had gone gray, like all the blood had drained out at once. He took a step toward her, then stopped, his hand curling slowly into a fist at his side. Caroline, Paul's sister, standing nearby, looked between them, horror dawning in real time. I set my drink down on the nearest table. The glass clinked softly against stone. That sound grounded me more than anything else. "I think that's enough dancing for me," I said calmly. I didn't wait for permission. I turned and walked toward the gate, my heels steady on the path. Behind me, chaos finally erupted. Voices overlapping, questions flying, Priscilla calling my name in a tone that was half panic, half fury. Victor shouted once. Just once. "Dawn, wait." I didn't look back. I got into my car and drove away, leaving my husband standing in a garden full of people who now knew exactly who he was. It was the last time most of them would ever see me as the woman I used to be. I didn't go home that night. I went to the apartment I'd rented 3 months earlier through a business LLC. A clean 1-bedroom in Alpharetta, 40 minutes from the house in Roswell. Furnished, anonymous, completely off Victor's radar. I sat on the edge of the bed and took one long breath. Not relief, completion. The following morning, Victor woke to an empty house. I know this because I'd already anticipated the moment. On his nightstand, centered carefully, was my wedding ring. Beneath it, a stack of printed bank statements. Every hotel charge, every suspicious transfer, every lie, documented in black and white. No note. No explanation, just evidence. At midnight, I disconnected my phone from our family plan, removed myself from location tracking, closed our joint checking account, and transferred my portion into a new account at a different bank. The mortgage and utilities would continue to autopay from an escrow account I'd established weeks earlier. Everything functional, nothing personal. By 8 a.m., Victor was calling my office. My assistant, thoroughly briefed, answered calmly. "Mrs. Whitmore is no longer with the company," she said. "I'm not at liberty to discuss her whereabouts." That wasn't entirely accurate. I hadn't left. I'd restructured. 2 weeks earlier, I'd transferred my ownership stake into a trust, with Beckett as primary beneficiary and manager. On paper, I'd retired. In reality, I'd removed Victor's access to everything I'd helped build. Beckett had known this day was coming. He'd been the first to notice something wrong. And now, the machinery I'd quietly assembled over months had begun to move. Victor still thought this was about embarrassment. He had no idea what was actually coming. Shock doesn't always look like screaming. Sometimes it looks like silence, so complete it scares the people around you. That was Victor's first response. By mid-morning, he'd already tried calling me 17 times. I know the exact number because I'd forwarded my old number to a voicemail service that transcribed every message and sent them neatly to my email. I read them all. The first few were confused. "Dawn, where are you? This isn't funny. People are asking questions. You left without saying anything." By the 5th message, irritation crept in. "You embarrassed me last night. You embarrassed Priscilla and Paul. What were you thinking?" By the 10th, the tone shifted again. Sharp, accusatory. "You didn't have the right to do that publicly. We're adults. You should have handled this privately." And by the 17th, around 2 in the afternoon, his voice cracked. "Please come home. We can fix this." I deleted every message without replying. Words had always been Victor's weapon. He twisted them, reshaped them, wore people down until they doubted their own perceptions. Silence was mine. That evening, I sat across from my attorney, Graham Ashford, in his downtown office. The room smelled faintly of old books and coffee, steady, familiar, grounding. Graham had been preparing divorce documents for weeks. The file on his desk was thick, tabbed with color-coded markers, each one representing a decision I'd made long before the garden party. "We're ready to file," he said calmly. "Irreconcilable differences, with supporting documentation of marital misconduct." I nodded. Under the terms of our prenuptial agreement, Victor wouldn't be formally served for 3 days. By then, he'd already be living in a version of reality where I no longer existed in any form he recognized. The next morning, the papers arrived by courier. Priority envelope, signature required. I knew the exact moment Victor opened them because my phone pinged with a notification from the doorbell camera I'd installed months earlier. What he found inside wasn't just a petition for divorce. It was a financial autopsy of our marriage. Every hotel charge, cross-referenced with Priscilla's known travel schedule. Every suspicious wire transfer traced through what looked like legitimate investments, but were in reality shell accounts tied to her. Victor thought he'd been clever. He hadn't realized I'd hired a forensic accountant in May, a precise woman named Catherine, whose entire career was built on following money where it didn't want to be found. Catherine had traced $87,000. That's how much Victor had funneled, in small increments, into an LLC Priscilla claimed was a real estate development opportunity. The project didn't exist. The LLC was registered to a post office box in Delaware. Priscilla was the sole officer. Every dollar had gone into an offshore account she'd been building as an escape fund. The divorce filing included Catherine's full report, 83 pages of documentation. Under our prenuptial agreement, infidelity combined with financial misconduct triggered a forfeiture clause. Victor would receive nothing beyond the legal minimum, and even that would be contested. By noon, Victor was at Graham's office demanding to see me. Graham's assistant called from the lobby. "Mr. Whitmore is here," she said, voice professionally neutral. "He's insisting on speaking with you." "Tell him I'm unavailable," I replied evenly. "And remind him all communication goes through his attorney once he retains one." That afternoon, Victor hired Winston Fletcher, an aggressive divorce attorney known for defending wealthy husbands in contentious splits. Winston was loud, expensive, and effective, but he wasn't prepared for what I'd built. That same day, my phone rang with a name I hadn't expected, Paul Blackwell. His voice was controlled, but barely. "Dawn," he said, "I need to know something. How long?" 4 months, I answered honestly, based on the earliest hotel receipt. Paul went silent. Then he said quietly, "I'm filing tomorrow. I wanted you to know." 2 marriages unraveling in parallel, and Victor, who'd believed himself untouchable, was about to discover how fragile protection really is when it's built on lies. As night settled over the apartment in Alpharetta, I stood at the window, city lights flickering below. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clear. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. And that choice, quiet, deliberate, irreversible, was already changing everything. Victor didn't collapse the way people expect men like him to collapse. He didn't beg publicly. He didn't spiral on social media. He didn't apologize. Instead, he mobilized. Within 48 hours of being served, before the shock had even finished settling, his family and friends began reaching out. Not to ask how I was, not to ask why, to manage me. The first call came from his sister. "Dawn," she said, her voice strained but careful. "Victor is not doing well. He feels blindsided. You could have handled this privately." Privately. That word again. I let the silence stretch long enough to make her uncomfortable. "He handled it privately for 4 months, I replied evenly. "I handled it accurately." She didn't know what to say to that. The next call came from a couple we'd vacationed with twice, people who'd toasted our anniversary less than a year earlier. "This whole thing feels extreme," the husband said. "You didn't have to ruin him socially." I closed my eyes for a moment, not out of pain, but exhaustion. "I didn't ruin him," I said. "I documented him." By the end of the week, the narrative Victor was trying to push became obvious. I was cold, vindictive, unforgiving, a woman who'd chosen humiliation over healing. What he didn't understand was that he'd trained me. Years of dismissals disguised as humor, years of emotional absence framed as professionalism, years of subtly teaching me that if I wanted to survive beside him, I had to be prepared, quiet, and precise. So when the pressure escalated, I didn't crack. I refined. Winston Fletcher filed motions questioning the enforceability of the prenup, claimed I'd manipulated Victor into signing it, claimed imbalance, coercion, lack of disclosure. Catherine dismantled those claims in under 48 hours. Every draft, every revision, every email proving Victor had reviewed the agreement with his own attorney before signing. Facts have weight. Victor's friends had opinions. Facts didn't care. Then came the social consequences. The invitations stopped quietly at first. Book club meetings suddenly postponed indefinitely. Charity committees Victor chaired asked him to step down to avoid distraction. One board sent a carefully worded email referencing recent developments and optics. Paul filed for divorce 3 days after the garden party, and Paul didn't stay quiet. Within a week, everyone who mattered knew exactly why. Victor's affair, the money, the lies. The narrative he'd hoped to control slipped cleanly out of his hands. The real blow came from an unexpected place, Victor's employer. He'd worked as a regional executive for a healthcare management company, well-paid, respected, image-sensitive. Someone, anonymously, sent their legal department documentation of the financial entanglements between him and Priscilla. No accusations, just questions. That was enough. 2 weeks after the party, Victor was placed on administrative leave pending internal review. The official reason cited potential conflicts of interest. The real reason was simpler. The company didn't want his name attached to theirs, while allegations of financial misconduct were appearing in public court filings. That was the night he finally got my new number, from Harper. It was 10:30 p.m. when my phone rang. I answered, didn't speak. "Dawn," Victor said. His voice sounded unfamiliar, thinner, strained. "I lost my job." I waited. "They say it's temporary," he continued, "but we both know what that means." I took a slow breath. "I documented the truth," I said calmly. "What happened after that was a consequence of your choices." "You destroyed my reputation," he snapped. "You turned people against me. You humiliated me." "You humiliated yourself," I replied. "I didn't create the affair. I didn't move the money. I didn't lie for months and expect silence to protect me." There was a pause. Then his voice dropped, colder. "This isn't over. Winston says we can fight the prenup." "Good luck," I said, and I ended the call. I didn't block his number. I wanted him to understand that he could reach me, but that reaching me wouldn't change anything. The escalation wasn't loud. It was systemic. Victor lost access, lost allies, lost control of the narrative. And somewhere in the middle of that unraveling, something shifted inside me. I stopped bracing. Stopped because I realized I wasn't reacting anymore. I was ahead. And the deeper Victor sank into panic and blame, the clearer my path became. The worst moment wasn't behind me. But for the first time, I knew I'd survive it. People assume the darkest moment is when everything explodes. It isn't. The darkest moment comes after, when the noise dies down and you're left alone with the aftermath, when there's no crisis to manage and no strategy to execute. Just silence. That silence found me 3 weeks after the garden party. The legal motions were filed. The social fallout was unfolding without my involvement. Victor had stopped calling, replaced by carefully worded emails from Winston. By every external measure, I was winning. And yet, one evening, sitting alone in the Alpharetta apartment with the lights off, I felt something crack. Not regret. Grief. Not for Victor. For the life I'd believed in. I stared at the wall where I still hadn't bothered to hang anything. The couch was functional, the kitchen stocked with essentials, the bed neatly made every morning, like muscle memory refused to let go. This wasn't loneliness in the romantic sense. It was dislocation. The sudden understanding that the person you built your identity beside was never standing where you thought they were. I thought of the early years, late nights balancing spreadsheets while Victor slept, convincing myself that contribution was love. I thought of the dinners I attended alone because clients come first. The anniversaries marked with flowers delivered by assistants instead of hands. I had mistaken endurance for partnership. And in that realization, I felt unbearably tired. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, the unfamiliar creak of a building that wasn't home. My chest felt tight, not panicked, just heavy, like something had finally settled where it belonged. Around 3 a.m., my phone lit up. A voicemail transcription from Victor. I shouldn't have read it, but I did. "I don't recognize my life anymore," he said, his voice slurred slightly. "Everyone's gone. They won't even return my calls. You didn't just leave. You erased me." The words lodged somewhere deep, not because they were true, but because for years I'd been the one erasing myself to keep him comfortable. I closed the app without responding. The next morning, I drove without a destination, ended up in a grocery store parking lot, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. I wasn't crying. That scared me more. Later that day, Harper called. Her voice was cautious, guarded in a way that told me she was bracing for impact. "Mom," she said, "Dad's been calling me a lot." "I figured," I replied softly. "I don't know what to say to him," she admitted. "He keeps saying you turned everyone against him." I closed my eyes. "What do you think?" I asked. There was a pause. I think he's more upset about losing control than losing you." The clarity in her voice undid me. I pulled over. "That's not something you should have had to learn," I said quietly. "I know," Harper replied, "but I did." After we hung up, I sat there longer than necessary. This was the lowest point. Not the public exposure, not the legal threats. The realization that my children were now navigating emotional terrain I'd spent years trying to shield them from. That night, I packed away the last box of photos I'd brought from the house in Roswell. Not to burn them, not to destroy them, just to acknowledge they belonged to a finished chapter. I slept for 10 hours straight afterward. And when I woke up, something had shifted. Not healed, but resolved. The dark moment didn't break me. It clarified me, because I understood then that survival wasn't the goal anymore. Reclamation was. And the next step wouldn't be about Victor at all. It would be about choosing myself, openly, unapologetically, and without asking permission. The turning point didn't arrive with new evidence. It arrived with confirmation, not from spreadsheets or affidavits, but from a voice that had no reason to lie to me anymore. 3 days after that sleepless night, my phone rang mid-afternoon. An unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. Almost. "Mrs. Whitmore?" a woman asked when I answered. Her tone was careful, professional, but strained. "This is Caroline Blackwell, Paul's sister. Priscilla's sister-in-law." "I hope I'm not overstepping," she continued, "but I thought you deserved to hear this directly, from someone who has nothing to gain." I leaned back against the kitchen counter, suddenly very still. "I'm listening," Caroline exhaled. "Priscilla's been lying to herself for months, but she wasn't lying to Victor." The words landed with weight. "She knew the investment wasn't real," Caroline said. "She helped structure it. She convinced Victor to move the money slowly so you wouldn't notice. She told him you were too passive, too trusting." I closed my eyes, not in pain, but recognition. "She said you wouldn't fight back," Caroline added quietly, "that you'd leave quietly if you ever found out." That was the moment. Not rage, not grief. A clean internal snap, like a rope finally pulled too tight. "I needed you to know," Caroline said, "because Victor's been telling people he was manipulated, that he didn't know what he was doing." "I appreciate you telling me," I replied evenly, "truly." After we hung up, I stood in the quiet apartment and let the truth settle. Not emotionally, but structurally. Victor hadn't been reckless. He'd been strategic, and that mattered. Not for revenge, for closure. That evening, Beckett came over unannounced. He didn't knock, just used the spare key like he always had. "You okay?" he asked, searching my face. I nodded. Better than I was. We sat at the small dining table, takeout boxes between us, neither of us touching the food. "She admitted it," I said. "Priscilla knew. Victor knew." Beckett didn't look surprised. "I figured," he said. "Dad doesn't gamble unless he thinks the odds are in his favor." I watched my son, this man who had stepped quietly into responsibility without being asked, and something loosened in my chest. "I'm done reacting," I told him. "Everything from here on out is deliberate." He smiled faintly. "That's the version of you they underestimated." The next week, I made 3 decisions. I stopped monitoring Victor's emails. I stopped reading court gossip. I stopped letting my days revolve around damage control. Instead, I focused on transfer. Not of assets, but of identity. I finalized the trust structure, handed Beckett full operational authority, stepped back publicly, intentionally, without drama. On paper, I looked like a woman retreating. In reality, I was repositioning. Harper called 2 days later. "I got your package," she said quietly. I'd sent it overnight, a tablet fully charged with one folder on the screen. The truth. Inside were time-stamped photos, bank statements, recovered text logs, voice messages obtained legally through subpoena. I hadn't explained. I hadn't warned her. I trusted her intelligence. I didn't call you because I didn't want to influence you, I said gently. I wanted you to see it yourself. There was a long pause. Then Harper said, her voice tight but steady, I don't recognize the man who raised me. The words hurt, but not the way they once would have. That doesn't mean he isn't your father, I replied. It means you're allowed to see him clearly now. 2 days later, Harper asked to meet at a coffee shop near her office. She looked exhausted, older somehow, but clearer. She slid her laptop across the table. I wrote this email, she said, to Dad. I wanted you to read it before I send it. The email was precise, clinical, devastating. No insults, just facts. Her final sentence stopped me cold. I don't hate you, but I don't trust you. And until that changes, I'm choosing distance. I closed the laptop gently. Don't send it yet, I said. She frowned. Why? Because he hasn't shown you who he really is yet, I said softly. Let him try to explain. Let him show you whether accountability is possible. Harper nodded slowly. In that moment, I understood something vital. The turning point wasn't about power over Victor. It was about release from him. I know I only needed to be aligned with myself. And once that happened, the rest fell into place. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. Victor's world didn't explode. It emptied. Within a week of Caroline's call, the invitations stopped entirely. Not dramatically, no confrontations, just polite distance. The weekly golf game suddenly had conflicts. The charity board postponed meetings indefinitely. The couples we'd once vacationed with stopped returning messages. Reputation, I learned, doesn't shatter. It evaporates. Paul Blackwell finalized his separation quickly, and he didn't protect Priscilla the way she'd assumed he would. He was meticulous, cold, honest with people who mattered. The story didn't change in the retelling. Victor and Priscilla, the hotels, the money. By the time gossip reached its third iteration, there was nothing left to soften. Victor tried to fight it. He hosted a dinner. 6 people confirmed, 2 showed. 1 left early. He posted a carefully worded statement on LinkedIn about resilience and new chapters. The comments were polite but thin. No one defended him. No one challenged the narrative. The illusion of support collapsed under its own weight. The real blow came when Winston Fletcher withdrew, citing irreconcilable differences with the client. That was legal language for, you won't listen, and I won't burn my reputation for you. Victor went through 2 more attorneys after that. Both advised settlement. Both walked away. By the time the court date loomed, Victor was representing himself. Angry, unprepared, convinced the system had betrayed him. It hadn't. It had documented him. I watched none of this directly. Beckett filtered what mattered. Catherine forwarded only what was relevant. I didn't attend depositions in person. I didn't engage with Victor's spiraling emails. I focused on building a life that didn't require my attention to his collapse. 3 months after the garden party, I did something Victor never expected. I organized a charitable event. A pediatric wing dedication at Northside Hospital, funded in part by a donation I made through the family trust. $250,000 in my parents' names. Enough to warrant a formal gala, enough to be public. The invitation list included everyone who'd attended the garden party, plus the broader social circle Victor had spent years cultivating. Doctors, business owners, community leaders. Black tie, elegant venue, no drama. Beckett stood beside me at the entrance, composed and confident. Harper flew in from Charlotte to attend, radiant in a navy dress that reminded people, quietly, where integrity had landed. People noticed. They always do. I didn't give speeches about resilience. I didn't reference the divorce. I smiled. I shook hands. I let actions speak. During the program, the hospital CEO thanked the donors by name. When she mentioned our family trust, the applause was warm, genuine. It felt like vindication without vengeance. Later, during the reception, Paul's sister, Caroline, approached me. She looked different, thinner, sharper, stronger. "This is how you win," she said quietly. "Not by fighting, by building something better. She was right. Victor had expected me to beg, to rage, to publicly unravel. Instead, I disappeared and reemerged in alignment with myself. Where was Victor that night? Not invited. Not mentioned. Absent in a way no explanation could fix. The court ruling came months later. It was efficient. The prenuptial agreement was upheld in full. The evidence of infidelity and financial misconduct stood uncontested. Victor received a lump sum settlement, his vehicle, his personal belongings. Everything else remained with me, or in trust for the children. He was also held responsible for half of the money he'd hidden with Priscilla. Personal debt, personal consequences. When the judge finalized the dissolution, she offered a single piece of advice: move forward without further contact. I had already done that. Victor left the courtroom without looking at me. I didn't watch him go, because by then the fallout had finished its work. What remained was clarity, distance, and peace that didn't require an audience. Healing didn't arrive like a celebration. It arrived quietly, on ordinary mornings, in moments so small they almost escaped notice. It arrived the first time I woke up without bracing myself for the day. The first time my phone stayed silent and I didn't check it anyway. The first time I realized my life no longer revolved around managing someone else's chaos. 2 years after the divorce was finalized, Harper got married. A small ceremony at a vineyard in the mountains. November air. Close friends. Chosen family. Victor wasn't invited. That was Harper's decision, and I respected it. I don't hate him, she told me months before the wedding. I just don't trust him. And I don't want uncertainty standing next to me on the most important day of my life. I didn't argue. The morning of the wedding, I helped fasten the clasp of her necklace. She stood in front of the mirror, radiant and steady, and I felt something deep and unshakable settle in my chest. You taught me what strength actually looks like, she said softly. Not dominance, not control, consistency. That day, as I watched my daughter walk forward toward a life built on honesty, I knew I'd broken the cycle. Later, life expanded again, not dramatically. Naturally, I met someone kind, a man who didn't flinch at truth, who listened without preparing a rebuttal, who understood that partnership wasn't about performance, it was about presence. We took things slowly because I no longer rushed toward what felt familiar. I chose what felt right. 5 years after the garden party, I woke up on my birthday in a home I'd chosen, surrounded by children who respected me, work that challenged me without consuming me, and peace that didn't require approval. When someone asked what I'd wished for as I blew out the candles, I smiled. I already have it, I said, and I meant it. Here's the lesson I learned, the one I hope someone listening needs to hear. You don't win by humiliating the person who betrayed you. You win by refusing to become small to accommodate their lies. Sometimes the strongest response isn't revenge. It's reconstruction. A life so honest, so aligned, that the past loses its power to haunt you. That's how you move forward. Not loudly, but completely.